Well, Genesis 49. Then Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather yourself together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come. Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their willfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down. He crouched as a lion and as a lioness. Who dare rouses him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, binding his foal to the vine and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He has washed his garments in wine and his vestures in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine and his teeth whiter than milk. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. Issachar is a strong donkey, crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant. So he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heel, so that his rider falls backwards. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attack him, shoot at him, and harass him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you. By the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above. Blessings of the deep that crouches beneath. Blessing of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph, and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. Thus ends the reading of the Word of God. Well, as we come to this is the second part of Jacob's last words and testament. You'll remember from last week where he blesses Manasseh and Ephraim. And now he calls his sons together in order that he might both bless them, though not all of these are blessings, but tell them about what is to take place. And so as we come to this, it's a fascinating section, mostly because it's not always the easiest to understand what is going on. And really, what is the purpose or the point of this text? I remember reading one commentary, and as he has been dealing with how difficult there are in places to translate, he gets to Joseph's section, and he writes, "This is an exegetical nightmare," meaning that this is a very difficult text. And I am by no means a Hebrew scholar, so I ask that you would bear with me as we go through this text. I do think we can come to see that here is Jacob. He is looking forward. He is looking into the future. He really is acting as a prophet. He is prophesying about things that will happen. Some of those are based on simply his knowledge of the children, but there are clearly elements in which he is prophesying about that either he is just incredibly adept at guessing, or the Lord has imbued him in order here to prophesy and to act as a prophet. And I think the latter makes the most sense, because here we have this huge transition taking place in the life of Israel. We are moving from the patriarchal time into the nation of Israel. And we'll see the ways in which Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all three of them, seemed to function as both prophets, as priests, and as kings. And as we transition now to the nation of Israel, those offices will then be divided up as they were. You'll have prophets, you'll have a priestly caste, and eventually you'll have kings. But here they're all wrapped into one. And so in that sense, it makes sense for Jacob to be here prophesying and telling what is about to take place. But as we'll move through this, there is also judgment that takes place. There is also this recognition of what you have done in this life carries over. There is a sense where the children, the sons, have misbehaved. They have acted in an evil way. And there is retribution that comes from that, that has long-lasting consequences. So as we look at this, there's not really any good way to divide this up other than to just go son by son by son by son through this text. And so Jacob begins by calling his sons, "Gather yourself together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come." And you'll note that phrase there, "in days to come," has that prophetic tone to it. And again, I think this is Jacob acting as a prophet. And he calls his children in this formal fashion, "Assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob, listen to your father." You can see the way in which it's structured there, where it starts here at one side and ends really doubling the same phrase. And so he begins by working through his sons, and he starts with Reuben, Reuben is the firstborn. And you'll see in the way in which he acknowledges that Reuben really is to be this one who carries on the family lineage. In ancient times, the firstborn son was to get the most amount of inheritance. And there would be a lot of emphasis placed upon the firstborn son to carry on this legacy and this heritage of the father. And you see that here as Jacob is talking about Reuben as his firstborn, the first fruits of my strength. He was the firstborn son. And he has dignity and preeminence in power. And so verse 3 begins by just acknowledging the fact that he is the firstborn. And because of that, he does have a dignity to him. And he does have preeminence. He is to be the most powerful or the most respected or the leader of the clan after Jacob. But then verse 4, and if you remember the story here, it speaks of Reuben as unstable as water. I mean, you can think of rough and turbulent seas and the ways in which you can't predict how these are going to go, how the waves are going to crash and move. And so you seem to have Reuben pictured here as somebody who is just moved about by his passions. And what he does, it's told in 3 different ways that he went up to his father's bed. He profaned or defiled one of Jacob's concubines, one of his slave wives. And because of that, it's this great offense. It is this great profaning, and it's just wickedness on the part of Reuben. And we're not really told really what's going on in Reuben's mind, but we can all understand and see the situation and go, this is just simply an evil thing for Reuben to be doing. And here Jacob just speaks about this in 3 different ways. He went up to his father's bed, you profaned it, he went up to my couch. It is just set here as this future testimony to the wickedness of Reuben. And so Reuben, who was supposed to have preeminence, was supposed to lead the tribes afterwards, will not have preeminence. And really, after this point, Reuben just fades away. If you notice, there are no prophets that come from the tribe of Reuben. There's no priests that come, and there's no kings that come. And Reuben just really fades off the stage of history here. And then he goes to hear that Reuben, who's the firstborn, who is expected to take on the mantle of the firstborn, will not do that. So then that you can see the line of thinking here. If the firstborn isn't now considered the firstborn, then we should come to the next two brothers, Simeon and Levi, that one of them surely would take on the mantle of being the firstborn. But that's not the case. Here, Simeon and Levi are brothers who are bloodthirsty. Weapons of violence are their swords. They kill men in their anger, and in their willfulness they hamstring oxen. There seems to be just a bloodthirstiness to them, to where they'll cut down men and they'll cut down animals. And here, predominantly, I think he has in view the incident at Shechem, where Dinah was taken and defiled. And then it was Simeon and Levi who plotted this plan of retribution, of vengeance, and slaughtered the entirety of the town. And here it just encapsulates or speaks of them as men who are not just looking to right wrongs, but men who are going above and beyond in order to inflict vengeance. And you'll note the way that Jacob here he's not blessing them. It's interesting here that the first two thus far of Reuben, and now here explicitly of Simeon and Levi, cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. And again, this idea that the vengeance that they're taking is going above and beyond. And I think that's why they speak of hamstringing oxen. It's just this unnecessary violence, isn't it? And so Jacob pronounces a curse on them. And that because of that, they will be divided and scattered. It seems as if they won't be able to be brought together again in order to cause havoc and bloodshed. And you'll note especially that this is exactly what actually happens to the Levites. The Levites are not given an inheritance. They're actually spread out throughout the entirety of the nation of Israel. But it is interesting to see that Simeon, it seems, is just simply divided out like that. And not much really comes of Simeon. But Levi his clan is chosen by the Lord in order to be the priests and those that care for the holy things. So while there's this curse that comes upon them for their anger, it just seems interesting to me that the Lord would still use Levi. And you'll even see this later on when sons of Levi, Phinehas and his, I believe it's his brother, they are actually used by the Lord to bring vengeance. And in their case, they are righteously bringing vengeance. And the Lord chooses then the Levites in order to be those who minister before him. Well, now that leaves three of the eldest born children unable to take on the mantle of the firstborn. And I think we know the story, but it's rather shocking when we get to it here if you've just been following along and didn't know where the story would be going, because the assumption would be is that the one who would be the firstborn, who would take on that mantle, would be Joseph. I mean, the story has been all about Joseph up to this point, and Judah has only had really small supporting roles. He's had one chapter that didn't paint him in the best of lights. But then we start to see as he rises up in order to take responsibility, and he is being elevated to the position of leader. Well, here Jacob confirms that with this rather expansive blessing on Judah. And so he begins in verse 8 that your brothers shall praise you. And again, it harkens back to Joseph. Joseph's dream was that his brothers would bow down before him. And here now we have this reversal where it is not Joseph, but rather Judah. That Judah will be elevated to this position where his brothers will praise him. And also that Judah will be victorious in battle, that he will have his hand shall be on the neck of his enemies, this picture of Judah's strength, of the tribe's victory over enemies. And again, coming back to that the father's son shall bow down before him, speaking of the ways in which Judah will be elevated to that status as the one who rules over the tribes, that the other tribes will bow down before him. And you end up also with a lot of this animal imagery found throughout here. And so here Judah is pictured as a lion's cub, as a lion and as a lioness, simply as a ferocious beast. Something that is strong and terrifying. And you can think down, who dares rouse him? He is crouched as a lion, as a lioness. The picture there is right, this giant sleeping lion. And you think of walking up to it and poking it. Again, I've poked a sleeping dog and she is unhappy with being woken up. I hate to see how angry a lion is, how a lion would respond to me. And so Judah is pictured here as this lion, which is another theme that's brought up later. You have the lion of the tribe of Judah. You have John's revelation, he sees a lion and a lamb, and you have both of these coming together ultimately in the Lord Jesus Christ. So Judah here pictured as this powerful animal. And then verse 10, the scepter shall not depart, and the ruler's staff from between his feet. The scepter here, clearly it's just a picture of him as the rightful ruler of Israel. And that from this time on, kings, if they come, and obviously here the Lord is preparing Israel for that time, the kings should come from the line of Judah. And that's what makes it interesting when we get to the first king who comes from the tribe of Benjamin. And even in the book of Judges, we see that really one of the few good judges is simply the one who comes from the tribe of Judah. But then also it speaks of tribute coming to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. And this really, you start to see this being fulfilled in the life of David and ultimately in the life of Solomon. You have Psalm 72 picturing this worldwide as the nations now stream into Jerusalem to worship at the feet of the true and proper king. And here this picture that is partially fulfilled in the life of David and partially fulfilled in the life of Solomon is ultimately being fulfilled in the life of Jesus. In verses 11 through 12, they seem to speak of the prosperity that comes from Judah's reign and rule. So his donkey is able to feed upon all of these vines. There is just an abundance of produce and an abundance of wealth. There is so much grape harvest being produced that it's just splashing up on everything. That it's like they're washing their garments in wine. It's just this picture of abundance, of superabundance. And verse 12 is a strange verse in terms of dealing with who Judah is, or his tribe. The eyes dark as wine and teeth whiter than milk. It's probably just simply speaking of handsomeness. You can think about the way David is spoken of as ruddy. He is someone who looks good. And verse 12, I think, is just highlighting the way in which you see kings described in the ancient Near East. You can think of the Song of Solomon and the way it uses these words in order to describe. And so you're left here with now this picture of who should be the rightful ruler of the tribes, and it's clearly meant to be Judah. And so you have really set forth here this idea of future kings coming from the tribe of Judah. And I think ultimately, too, hidden in here is this idea of a coming Messiah who would be an even greater king than the earthly kings, even though it's hinted at. But I think we've seen throughout Genesis, there's the seed of the woman who's coming to crush the seed of the serpent. There is the seed who comes from Abraham in order to bring this great blessing. And then there'll be one coming from the tribe of Judah who will be a lion, fierce and mighty, and the one whom will rule eternally, and the one whom all peoples will come and do obedience to. Well, Jacob then continues And now we end up with much shorter, almost vignettes of the rest of these children. In verse 13, we talk about Zebulun. And that Zebulun will dwell, and really where he'll settle between Israel and the Phoenicians. And the Phoenicians known for their ships and shipbuilding. It seems that there's some future tie between Zebulun and those up there. And then Issachar, whose name comes from my wages, will himself become a slave. And so you have here that it seems to picture Issachar as a beast of burden, but also someone who is lazy. And so the tribe will simply be absorbed into, or the tribe will be brought about as slaves to likely the Canaanites. And then we come to Dan, whose name means to vindicate or to judge. And you can see the play on words here, that Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. That Dan is pictured as a serpent or as a viper that attacks horses. And you can think of the tribe of Dan. This is the tribe that Samson came from. In all of his might, and the way that this one man harassed the Philistines. That he truly was like a viper to them. And so Dan here is pictured as having this military prowess. But verse 18 is rather strange to place this at the end of this, because it seems as if it's speaking of the way in which Dan is victorious. But then I wait for your salvation, O Lord. And especially thinking of Samson, I wonder if the idea here is that, yes, Dan is powerful, Dan is mighty, but again, if you think of Samson doesn't have any real, his power is derived solely from the Lord. And so that Dan, who may be a viper or a serpent in the way, that ultimately his power and his victory comes from the Lord. And then verses 19, 20, and 21, we just deal very briefly with these other three children. So Gad, raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Gad's territory will be one on the outer edge of Israel, so they will be constantly engaged in these military skirmishes and conflicts. Asher, whose name comes from delight or happiness, will have rich food and royal delicacies. And Naphtali, this is another one that's difficult to quite understand. It could be that Naphtali is here pictured as a doe that's running around and completely free, but then bears all of these children and chooses this settled life and brings forth these great multitude of children. And then we now move to another extended section of blessing, which this makes sense as we come to Joseph. And Joseph here begins, he's pictured as the man of Psalm 1, planted by a beautiful stream. His branches run over the walls. He is fruitful. And you think of his life. His life is one in which ultimately, through the workings of the Lord, he is prosperous in all that he sets out to do. And verse 23 probably is a way to highlight what he has already gone through. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. I think when you have Jacob seems to be moving between the past and the future. And I think here he's probably referencing the past and the difficulties that Joseph has gone through. And which makes verse 24 all the more meaningful, yet he has remained unmoved. And he has remained unmoved, and he goes on to list all of these qualifications of the Lord. By the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, the shepherd, the stone of Israel. How did Joseph persevere through all of these difficulties, all of these trials? He did so because the mighty one was with him. The mighty one of Israel, the one who is pictured as a stone, as a rock, as a wall, as a shield. The one who's pictured as a shepherd who is guiding and walking with. And one who is the mighty one who is able to overtake even Pharaoh himself later on. That it is the Lord who is with Joseph. And then verses 25 through 26 are just this ever expansive blessing, and one in which Jacob seems to encompass really everything. So you end up with the heavens above and the deep below, and this great blessing is all-encompassing of everything. And you have the blessing of children and the blessing of your father, and this just great blessing that seems to, that Jacob is praying for Joseph, that he would be this great and fruitful nation. May they be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who is set apart from his brothers. And if you think about the two main tribes that will play the biggest role in the history of Israel, it will be Judah and Ephraim. Those will be the two biggest tribes. They'll be the ones that eventually will split one from another, and it'll be Ephraim who takes on the 10 tribes, and it'll be Judah who takes on him and Benjamin. And so it does seem to be prophesying that Joseph's tribe, that they will be this great and mighty tribe. And again, you have, if you know the rest of the history, you do seem to have, though, the sadness that's not really mentioned here. The great blessing that Jacob prays over Joseph, eventually it'll be the northern kingdom that falls so far into idolatry. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. And then finally, he ends with Benjamin as a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and in the evening dividing the spoil. So you have this contrast between Joseph, who is being attacked by archers, and Benjamin, who seems to be going on the offensive as this mighty hunting animal. And indeed, his tribe seems to have, again, to be warrior-like. And you have Saul, who comes from the tribe of Benjamin, who is a mighty warrior. You also have Ehud in the book of Judges. So more mighty warriors that come from the tribe of Benjamin. So what are we to make of this section? As I said, it is strange. I mean, it makes sense in context that this family has been so important on the pages of Genesis. Actually, if you think about it, Abraham is called in chapter 12. Jacob's story begins in chapter 25. That means the bulk of Genesis from 12 to 50 is about the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And the ending of Genesis, so 25 to 50, is all about the life of Jacob. And so it makes sense that we would have here his last will and testament. It also harkens back and brings us back to Noah. As Noah did the same, he prophesied about the future for his sons, that some would be blessed and others for their evil would be cursed, such as Ham. And so again, it makes sense in the context of Genesis that here we are simply seeing the effects of the children's sins, the blessings of God. And as the later Israelites are looking and reading this, some of this would be very present to them as they see their tribe maybe dwindling down, or they see their tribe as one that is great and glorious, from the tribe of Judah, from the tribe of Benjamin, from the tribe of Ephraim, or from the tribe of Simeon or Reuben. And so I think one of the things that we see first and foremost is Jacob acting as a prophet here and prophesying about what is to come. But I think as well you see the sins of the father. You see the ways in which Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, in which they sinned, or even maybe the slothfulness of Issachar, and the ways that what they did had effects on future generations. And we think of that as parents. It's quite scary, isn't it? And so I think there's some of that here, in that what Reuben did had effects for his whole clan. What Simeon did had effects for his offspring, and so forth and so on. But you also see the other side. Judah is no more deserving of these rich blessings than anyone else. To be born in the tribe of Judah, to be one in which the scepter shall never depart, is not something that they are given based on merit. They are given based on just simply where they were born. that God was blessing this tribe in order that one day it would come forth, the Lord Jesus would come forth from this tribe. And so I see, and I think that we see both here. We see the responsibility that Reuben and Simeon and Levi are responsible, and their effects and their actions affected others. But then we see God in his richness blessing Judah, blessing Joseph, blessing others, not because they deserve it, but simply that is who God is. And certainly, ultimately, at the core of all of this is this idea already coming through that there will be a king who will come. I think here we just simply see that we are already starting to seed, no pun intended, this idea of a coming great and glorious king. One who would be personified, or one who we would see in David, but then see beyond someone even greater. And so here, as Genesis is ending, we're left with seeing a family that is still in turmoil, that will move on into a nation that will still be in turmoil. There'll be curses, there'll be blessings, there'll be obedience, there'll be disobedience. But through it all, God will be accomplishing his plan. That's how Jacob can prophesy. That God is accomplishing his plan. And ultimately, I think that is what this section is about, that God will accomplish his plan through, ultimately, his son, the seed of the woman, the seed of Abraham, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. The Lord Jesus Christ will come with healing in his wings.